wanted to talk about some news events going on. Have y'all heard anything? Did you listen to the podcast, hear about the steel tariffs or aluminum tariffs?
I've heard about them.
You've heard about them? Okay, so Trump is thinking about imposing a 25% steel tariff and a 10% tariff on aluminum. So it's really interesting because the whole market kind of pulled back and there seems to be a little bit of fear. You had Paul Ryan, who's the Speaker of the House, come out against the tariffs. And then actually earlier today, he changed his position. So it's kind of interesting how the market reacted. The S&P actually ended up positive for the day. So everybody's kind of sitting and waiting to see what Trump does with these tariffs. And I went into a little bit of detail about a company that I bought, Steel Dynamics. If you're looking for a play, it's a short-term play, probably gonna have a lot of trading momentum if the tariff goes through, or if it doesn't, I just have a really tight stop loss on it. So yeah, it's basically a news trade. Like I said, it's gonna be extremely volatile. Today I was watching it and it was down 2% at some points, and then it ended down like a 1/6% down. So it's sitting right at a key support resistance level short term. Also, another thing, the tax cuts are creating a lot of mergers. Companies with the money that they're getting from these tax cuts are sitting on a bunch of cash. So they're actually starting to go out and buy other companies and put that cash to use, or doing share buybacks. So look out for that. It's a really interesting time, especially with the Fed starting to raise interest rates. It looks like companies are trying to get their mergers done right now, really cheap, finance them really cheap compared to a couple of years whenever interest rates are high. Any comments, any questions y'all have about those news events?
You said it was 10%?
10% on aluminum and 25% on steel. I'm more focused on the one on the steel tariff because the U.S. is the largest importer of steel. So it's kind of seen as an industrial metal. So it's really important to our economy.
Did you hear that he might make exceptions to certain countries like Canada or Mexico?
Right, so that was kind of the point that Ryan said today, is that he supports targeting specific countries. So I actually read the report, which is really boring, about Wilbur Ross's take on the tariffs. And what he basically said is 24% tariff on all steel, or he wanted to impose quotas or particular tariffs on some countries. Like I said, it was 24 was the lowest that he had. For some countries, it was like 100%. So he wrote a report with varying tariffs on different countries, for instance, like China or Japan or Canada. He thought that there should be a specific tariff on those. So Trump is kind of interesting. He uses, this is kind of his negotiation tool. Thank you very much. Negotiation tool is that he'll do something kind of crazy like this, and then he'll use that to negotiate a deal, a better deal, with maybe NAFTA. So we'll see what kind of happens. Like I said, that news is supposed to be resolved this week. That's what he said last week. So, you know, it's Tuesday. In the next couple of days, just look out for any headlines involving tariffs, because they definitely will move the stock market.
So like in broad terms, what do you think like will be winners and losers of that tariff if it does go through?
So ultimately, domestic consumers would be a loser because they would have to pay higher prices for anything containing steel. Depends on the tariff, of course. What's up?
This reminds me of quote, they keep mentioning, steel is good for defense. So you want to watch that sector too.
It's a very volatile sector right now because you have a lot of short-term traders like me taking short-term positions based off of this news. Now, it will affect the space fundamentally in the long term, but I personally think that you're going to see a massive pop if these tariffs do go through, and then maybe a sell-off or consolidation. But it will change the space fundamentally, but that's not going to happen for a while because that's through earnings reports, which happen quarterly. So you were asking the biggest gainers and losers. The biggest gainer is going to be domestic steel producers. The biggest loser is going to be any companies that use steel pretty heavily. I saw an interview with a steel CEO who said that cars, because people were freaking out, like, how is this going to affect cars? And if you watch the stock market whenever these tariffs were released, things like Ford or GM started selling off really heavy. They were down 3 or 4%. And like I said, this is probably a bias because it was coming from a steel CEO, but he said that the average car has only a ton of steel. So if they could produce steel at the same price of the open market right now, it would only resemble about a $200 price increase on cars, which isn't as crazy as you think. But like I said, that's very biased news from a steel CEO. He has the best interest of the company. He's going to try to make the tariff sound as good as possible. So if you're more interested in that, I would just look and do your own research and form your own ideas. Anything else that y'all have questions about? Does that answer your question, Gabriel?
Yeah.
Okay.
Then, so like you said, the consumers would be taken up. So like on the aluminum part of it, what about consumers of aluminum? Say for example, like Coke or like beer companies that use aluminum on their packaging. So
Right.
Like,
So I
like
mean,
they will end up paying that cost and then just eating it up, or will they end up passing that cost to consumers and we'll see an increase in beverages that contain aluminum packaging?
so yeah, we could. That's why I was saying that consumers will ultimately, at least in the short term, lose. Is because companies aren't going to eat these in their profit margins. They're going to pass them on to consumers. So you might get a 3 or 5 or 10% spike in prices over the long term. The reason why I'm not as concerned with aluminum is because we don't import nearly as much as steel.
So you guys, you're saying we're going to pay more for beer?
Yeah, you might have to pay more for beer. Get into home brewing, I guess, right?